1944. But by then, it was too late. The world's great arsenal across the Atlantic had already poured forth an ever-gathering stream of bombers and fighters for the final Gotterdammerung in the skies above the Reich. The air crew needed for those planes flew in and came ashore in ever-increasing numbers from the beginning of 1944 to make final victory inevitable. And while all this was being achieved in the air, the American boys created a social change in Britain, often by their sheer volume, which would build to a sociological revolution. They were an incomparable force of nature. 1 in 6 people in the county of Suffolk, where many of the 8th AF bases were, would be American by 1944. In the tired, war-weary villages of Suffolk, Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, and North Essex, where lists of sons had been building over 4 years to join their fathers on war memorials, the arrival of the Americans proved a shock, the repercussions of which are still being felt today. Hollywood burst into the hamlet. A succession of film actors arrived to serve or entertain, and British civilians and U.S. personnel alike found themselves rubbing shoulders with stardom. It gave glamour to lives already scripted with high drama, in which American flyboys had the aw-shucks charm of screen idols. The lure of such clean-cut crusaders was not lost on village maidens, who provided solace and comfort to the young men far from home, who daily returned from visions of aerial horror no training could prepare them for. Fearful scenes in which friends were burned alive in stricken bombers, or were seen tumbling helplessly to earth without a parachute. In fact, the promise of such a warm female welcome had even been alluded to in official USAAF training material. A movie star turned airman documentary maker had turned to the camera, pointed to his pilot's wings, and said the glittering badge's effect on girls was phenomenal. That desire to cut a dashing figure when the draft came had proved a bigger draw than the words of any recruiting poster. But there were other more serious reasons for choosing to join the air war rather than slog through mud in the infantry or face endless stretches of ocean in the Navy. In the immediate previous decades of peace, the youngsters of the United States had become more air-minded perhaps than any other nation as the new travel medium shrank its vast continent. Now American boys were getting the chance to turn remote hope into reality by learning to fly at the government's expense. Seldom expressed, but buried in the psyche, was also the greater knowledge that the Nazis were enslaving the old world across the Atlantic, a Europe many of the young airmen's ancestors came from. Striking from the sky at the heart of the enemy seemed an effective way of breaking those chains. The training and the clumsy experimentation of the first 2 years of war were now over. American youth had come en masse to do or die in the skies of Europe. Die they would, 26,000 being killed in the 8th AF. And as suddenly as the Americans had arrived, shaking the foundations of an ancient society, the survivors disappeared back across the Atlantic. They took with them 41,000 British girls and more than 14,000 children they had fathered. For most combat airmen of the 8th AF, the stuff of nightmares they witnessed in the skies over Europe would gradually be swept into the recesses of gentle memory over the following decades. Most of them today would admit their time in the service has a dreamlike quality, as if it was another young man who had stood in their place and stepped through the fire to glory decades before. But fortunately for the generations that followed, the airmen wrote diaries, a vast number of them, unlike their comrades in the RAF, who in fear of security breaches were not encouraged to do so. And it was not only the men who kept journals. The women who came with them, the Wax and Red Cross girls, created records too, writing home perhaps more assiduously about the lost Britain they were enshrining forever, from the glitz of Yank London to the country kindness of strangers. Not all of the Americans lived to read those scribbled records to their grandchildren. It is the content of these diaries and letters, written within hours of traumatic events in the sky 70 years ago, which is the heart of this book. Winter. 1. He had us dead to rights. It was a brutal way to begin the last day of your life. The torch beam in the eyes,